Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Millennials to Boomers, how MDOT involved 6300 for its LRTP. It's so great to have such a huge audience again for this webinar. We're thrilled to be hosting the Michigan Department of Transportation and WSP to tell their story about their public involvement for their LRTP. Many thanks to our co-sponsors, the American Planning Association and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. My name is Dave Biggs, and I am the Chief Engagement Officer here at MetroQuest, and I'm pleased to be your host today. I'm going to begin by going through the agenda. The way I'm going to begin is I'm going to talk specifically about the challenges that we have seen looking across so many LRTPs, specifically around public involvement for long-range transportation planning. And then I'm going to quickly go over to the Michigan Mobility 2045 team, and they're going to talk about how they were able to really transform engagement in such a dramatic way for their long-range transportation plan. And then I'm going to come back on for a few minutes talking about best practices across public involvement for LRTPs, and specifically highlighting some of the many best practices that the Michigan team used in their long-range transportation plan outreach. And then we're going to open it up for a Q&A at the end of the session. So at any time during the conversation today, if you think of a question, the GoToWebinar panel, the question box, if you look down there, you'll have an opportunity to ask your questions along the way, and anything that comes up in there, we'll get to as many of those as we can live during the webinar at the end of the session. So ask away. So to begin with, I'd like to talk about those challenges that we have seen across long-range transportation plans with respect to public involvement. There are particular things about long-range transportation planning that make public involvement, which is already difficult, even more challenging. Well, the first one is these projects by nature, by definition, are long-range planning projects. And, you know, the public is more concerned about what's happening today, what's happening this week, next month. They're really not thinking about 20 or 30 years into the future. And so it's difficult to get their attention on that time frame. The second challenge is, by nature, they're usually involving a very large scale, either a metropolitan scale or an entire state. And so the public is obviously more concerned about where they live, where they work, where they recreate, and how to get to and from. And so there's a bit of a mismatch, which makes public involvement challenging. Number three is that by nature, these documents tend to be very policy oriented. It's very easy for agencies to fall into the trap of talking to the public about policies when the public are just not thinking about policies, they're thinking about their own priorities. And so there tends to be a translation that's necessary as a result of that. And number four, the issues that are being dealt with respect to long-range transportation planning are complicated. They're not the kinds of issues that people think about every day. There's a lot of trade-offs and options that are not the part of the public discourse normally, and there's many people that feel intimidated about weighing in on that. So those factors combined together make public involvement for long-range transportation typically fairly low participation. Oftentimes, agencies are talking about hearing from a fairly narrow demographic, not representative of the entire population. And oftentimes the input can be criticized as being maybe uninformed because of the complexities of the issues and constraints and trade-offs that are being faced in the process. Having people weigh in an uninformed way can be unhelpful. So with that, I raise those because the Michigan Mobility 2045 team did a fantastic job of overcoming these challenges in such a spectacular way. So I'm going to turn it over now to Brad Sharlow, who is going to introduce his team and talk about their case study. So over to you, Brad. Brad, are you there?
Yes, Dave. Thank you very much. I am Brad Sharlow. I serve as the project manager for the State Long Range Transportation Plan, also known as Michigan Mobility 2045. With me in the room today, I have Anita Richardson and Kyle Haller, who are both serving as leaders in our public involvement effort here at MDOT for the State Long Range Plan, as well as Shane Peck from WSP, who has been our consultant lead on the public involvement. So what I'm going to share with you briefly up front is a little bit more background and kind of what we're trying to do here with this long range plan, and then we'll turn it back over to them to really get into the details on our success. So basically, for those who are trying to understand what a long range plan is and where that fits in, is basically this is a multimodal policy-based planning document that sets the stage for a new vision, goals, objectives, strategies, and performance measures for the next 25 years. So we are looking at the year 2045 right now and all the steps that need to be taken in order to develop an integrated multimodal system. This is federally required and does have a 20-plus year planning horizon, and as we'll talk about here, it requires and entails quite an extensive amount of public and stakeholder engagement. So this is multimodal in nature. This effort has been involving all modes of transportation, not just cars and trucks. So one thing we want to highlight here that we're doing here in Michigan right now, which is the first in the nation to try this out, is to take the 3 federally required statewide plans for a state long range plan, a state freight plan, as well as a state rail plan, and in addition, try to meet the suggestions and recommendations from the League of American Bicyclists for a state active transportation plan and combine those all into one comprehensive multimodal plan. And so we have been in discussions with our 3 federal agencies who require these documents, and they've been in support, and we're working quite heavily on integrating these plans in one comprehensive effort. What I want to highlight here of what we've done thus far is we first started out by holding a workshop last August to kind of lay out the foundation of the different ideas for doing public involvement, and that culminated in a new public and stakeholder participation plan where we had it out for 45 days during the months of October and November of 2018. Following that, we held our first round of public and stakeholder engagement from January until the very beginning of May, where we did a hybrid of several options to engage the public to reach a diverse population group. So we'll talk about the MetroQuest here, which is why you're here today, but we use MetroQuest in several ways in order to reach out. We also did over 30 in-person meetings or public events that we either were tapped into as an additional presenter or had a table with a booth where we could encourage folks to use the survey. We also have a dedicated website, which we'll discuss a little bit more specific to our plan, engagement of social media, and then we had a couple of telephone town halls. So basically, this approach was a mixed, diverse way of reaching different population groups across the entire state. The MetroQuest survey, this is the first time MDOT has tried to use MetroQuest here in the state of Michigan. We had this open from January 1st to April 15th, 2019. We used quite a bit of different hybrids of ways to promote this survey. We used our general news releases, Facebook ads, mass distribution emails, social media, stakeholder letters, as well as we went out and shared this word of mouth at our public meetings, and through our stakeholder engagement, we asked them to help in the publicizing of this as well. This map here basically shows out of the 6,300 surveys that we received as a result of this, where the responses on the surveys were. So Michigan, of course, for those who aren't familiar, is made up of 2 peninsulas, and the southern part of the lower peninsula is where all the urban metropolitan areas over 50,000 are, and then we do have some smaller metropolitan areas up in the northern part of the state with Traverse City, Marquette, and all of those larger urban areas received a significant amount of feedback and surveys filled out. In the rural areas, we did get participation as well, throughout those areas as well. And we're pleased to say that we got responses from just about every county in the state of Michigan as a result of this survey. So we just want to highlight here that, yes, over this period of time, we did have 6,300 surveys filled out statewide. And what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Shane Peck from WSP, and he's going to talk more about the findings and exactly how we use MetroQuest for this effort.
Thanks, Brad. As Brad mentioned, we were thrilled with the amount of surveys that were ultimately completed through MetroQuest. We had more than 10,000 people visit the MetroQuest site and right at 6,300 completed surveys out of those folks. As you can also see on the screen, we had more than 2,700 people complete those surveys through their smartphones, which is the primary way a lot of people are now accessing the internet and engaging online. On this chart, you also see the spike in the number of surveys completed between March and April of 2019. Brad talked about some of those ways that MDOT tried to get the word out about the survey and the state long-range plan, and this just emphasizes that importance of being proactive in communicating that the MetroQuest site is available and making sure that link is available out there. What happened in this instance where we saw that spike is that someone received the link and then posted it on a popular public forum, and their particular group had 60,000 subscribers. And so starting on a Sunday, we saw about 1,300 surveys completed just on that Sunday. The next day, there were another 700 surveys completed. We were seeing about a survey a minute completed over that time period. So again, just emphasizing how important it is to proactively communicate that the MetroQuest site is available through as many different ways as possible. One of the great things about MetroQuest is that the final screen allows you to ask some general demographic questions, and so these were the results from those questions on the Michigan Mobility 2045 MetroQuest site. You can see we also got 1,700 comments through that final page where we had a general comment box so people can provide more input at that point if they'd like. We were particularly pleased with the age distribution. We had great age distribution across all of the age groups, but particularly there was concern for engaging millennials. And as Dave was talking about, it can be difficult to engage people in general in a long-range transportation planning process. And you can just imagine, college students and younger folks are going to be even less inclined to engage in something like that in a lot of cases. And so we were very pleased that our largest age group that filled out MetroQuest surveys was the 25 to 34-year-olds. We also saw good distribution through incomes, which is important for environmental justice concerns and making sure that we are meeting federal requirements for engaging all of the different populations, particularly underserved populations, and through the various ethnicities and minority groups. While some of the minority group numbers we would love to see be larger, we did do also, as part of the state long-range transportation planning process, we did a statistically valid poll of 1,500 people throughout Michigan, and so it was done by a professional polling firm that made sure that all of the key minority groups were involved in the appropriate percentages. And actually the results we see here as far as the numbers of minorities engaged were larger through MetroQuest than they were through that statistically valid statewide poll. So the first interactive engagement page that takers of the MetroQuest survey came to was priority rankings. Here we had 7 different transportation categories that people could rank as their top 5 in order from 1 through 5 by moving those up above that line. And when somebody clicked on each of the categories, as you can see here, quality of life, a definition as we were describing and as MDOT was describing quality of life came up so that they would know, what we meant by that particular category, in this case, quality of life. For that particular screen, we were able to take the results provided through MetroQuest and create this graphic, which shows the number of times that a particular issue was ranked in the top 5. So in this case, we started to see what would become a trend of people wanting MDOT and the state of Michigan to focus on taking care of the existing transportation system, followed by quality of service and quality of life. And those descriptions out to the side were the descriptions that people saw when they selected those items on that screen. The next screen allowed survey takers to decide between two choices, basically a either or called a trade-off screen, where you can choose one option or the other, or you could say that you were neutral on it. And again, we started seeing trends in this regard, with most of the state going in the same direction on the various trade-offs, with an emphasis on taking care of existing infrastructure as opposed to expanding or building new infrastructure. One interesting result is the first one of modal priorities, where more people wanted to see improvements for bikes, pedestrians, and transit as opposed to cars and trucks. But otherwise, we saw the similar trends as the other MetroQuest screens of people wanting to focus on taking care of the existing system. Also, through MetroQuest, by asking for people to voluntarily provide their zip codes at the end, we were able to see where the survey responses were coming from and to break those out by MDOT's 7 regions. And that's what this shows for the trade-off screen. You can see all of the regions pretty much went in the same direction as the statewide results, except for a couple of regions on modal priorities said they would like to see more improvements for cars and trucks versus bikes and pedestrians. So this is really informative for MDOT and for these particular regional MDOT staff to be able to see where the people in their region are as far as transportation and what their priorities are. The last interactive screen that people could be involved with was the budget allocation, where we provided them with the equivalent of $50 in these stars that they could then distribute into various pots of money related to different transportation modes and transportation priorities. And this is basically a mirror of the graphic that MetroQuest provides for that particular screen, just one of them. There's several different options you can have, and we recreated this to fit more the brand of our Michigan mobility program. And again, we saw similar trends here of people wanting to take care of existing pavement, existing bridges, and the existing system as opposed to expanding the system or investing in new items. Here again, we were able to break these results out by each of MDOT's regions. We saw that these results were pretty close with the statewide results, but again, through this process, we could identify some different areas where in some of the regions there were slightly different priorities. In this case, for passenger rail, the very dark blue line is the Detroit metro area, the Detroit metro region. You can see that with passenger rail was a much higher priority in that area than in other parts of the state. We could also break out the results by the various regional planning organization boundaries, or MPOs, in the state of Michigan. And so that information could also be provided to these particular organizations and was illustrative for MDOT to see if there were any major differences in the priorities between these planning organizations, who are also required to do their own transportation plans. And you can see in this case, in passenger rail, there were some regions where that was a much higher priority than in other areas. Same way with bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And now I'd like to pass it over to Anita Richardson, who is the Public Involvement and Hearings Officer with MDOT, to talk a little bit more about the broader communications and public involvement program.
Thank you, Shane. So making meaningful changes within the public sphere requires capturing public input through targeted outreach. And to this end, MM 2045 is focused on engaging the public to develop a long-term vision and priorities for the future of transportation in the state of Michigan. But as Dave pointed out, achieving meaningful engagement during the transportation planning process is challenging due to the long time frame of planning. As Dave pointed out, the large scale of considering the multimodal interest that exists throughout the state, the policy orientation of the plan makes it difficult because the public is often more concerned about project planning in their own communities. And it's a challenge due to the complex issues, the trade-offs, the limitations, and constraints of transportation planning that just make it hard for the public to provide truly informed input. So achieving meaningful engagement or capturing informed public input early in the transportation decision-making process required all of our partnering organizations to be in the room, regardless of mode, along with the public in order to dialogue and collaborate effectively on the issues. To advance the public involvement objectives of MM 2045 and to learn what concerns and impacts the public, we needed to hear a wide range of views from a wide spectrum of stakeholders. To achieve public buy-in, we needed to be able to answer the question, what does MM 2045, the long-range transportation plan, mean to me? So to this end, our focus for MM 2045 during the past year has been on creating and maintaining a unified vision for state transportation by putting in place the mechanisms to foster ongoing communication across collaborative boundaries between partnering transportation agencies, the public, and key stakeholders. Our goal is to provide an opportunity for the public and community stakeholders to share in informing the long-range transportation decisions that will affect their lives. MetroQuest has allowed us to meet the public where they are, to extend our reach throughout the state, and to inspire public trust by encouraging the participation of a very diverse group of Michigan stakeholders. Our plan was always to combine traditional and non-traditional outreach tools. So during our initial visioning phase, we hosted over 30 in-person meetings or events, and we were able to reach 1,298 people. Most important, we used every in-person opportunity to make the MetroQuest survey available on-site via paper copy on PCs that we set up on-site during the meetings, and we also encouraged the public to take the survey on their mobile devices during the meetings. So we not only utilized MetroQuest as a new and innovative tool to extend outreach, we met with communities with disabilities, with marginalized communities. For instance, we hosted a visioning session in partnership with members of the deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing community. We met with members of Warriors on Wheels, a group of wheelchair-bound residents in Detroit. We traveled across the state to visit libraries, farmers markets. We attended community and local agency meetings. We went to local college events. We met with rural residents at non-motorized trail meetings and with tribal government leaders. Bottom line, our MetroQuest survey allowed us to reach thousands and to go far beyond the scope of traditional outreach. And as a result, we captured a great deal of info. We were able to do so in a short period of time, and we were able to capture that information specifically about the values, preferences, and attitudes of individuals and groups who would be impacted by statewide transportation decisions. So by making the connections this way, we were in essence making a conscious decision to integrate traditional outreach approaches like creating a dedicated website, sending email blasts, using social media, posting to Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and YouTube, and just sending press releases. And we integrated this with the new innovative approach to public involvement that involved MetroQuest, and we were able to greatly improve our outcomes and to basically extend ourselves beyond the reach of traditional tools to stakeholders and to get the public to participate in this effort. And much of our success was accomplished by using every opportunity to promote MetroQuest within every venue we used for public outreach. So whether traditional, non-traditional, innovative, online, mobile devices, in-person meetings, our mantra became, we need to hear from you. Your input is important. Please take the online MetroQuest survey. So in addition to using traditional tools to drive traffic to MetroQuest, we went a bit further, and we also used more innovative tools like Facebook ads, telephone town hall meetings, and we posted to popular online communities. And by doing so, we were able to reach thousands and drive that traffic to take the survey as well. So here to share more about how we integrated these strategies to extend our reach is Kyle Haller, MDOT Planner and MM2045 Deputy Project Manager. Kyle.
Thank you, Anita. So we wanted to promote the long-range plan in the survey as much as possible. To do so, we went above and beyond traditional outreach, such as what Anita was mentioning. We purchased Facebook and Instagram ads to improve public visibility of the survey and the long-range plan development. Doing so, we reached approximately 500,000 Michigan residents. Ads appeared 1.2 million times in the social media feed, and over 1,700 people clicked on the survey link. It was also shared 22 times to their social media accounts. Also, we developed a dedicated Michigan Mobility webpage to publicly house long-range plan materials and to solicit public engagement. As part of this, we provided a direct link to the MetroQuest survey on the homepage. This provided an easy way for us to tell the public verbally how to get to the MetroQuest page. We would just say, hey, check out www.michiganmobility.org, and the link would be right there. Another method we used was telephone town halls. And telephone town halls are essentially a public meeting on the conference call that allows for back and forth dialogue between MDOT staff and the public. 3,000 people joined our meetings, and it was a great tool to promote the plan and direct people to the MetroQuest survey. And we also mentioned other ways they can become involved. And this map right here is similar to what Brad shared earlier, but this is all the counties we reached through telephone town halls. We're able to reach each county and say, hey, go to the website, check out the survey, and we really want to hear your voice. Now, you may be wondering, what do you do with the data that you obtain through MetroQuest? For us, we analyze the data and synthesized it into key findings. These findings were then taken to MDOT leadership, and it helps us make key policy decisions in the long-range plan. Examples of key takeaways include, we found, it's really important that we repair and maintain existing roads and bridges. Quality of life is very important to the public. Addressing traffic congestion, providing transportation options for elderly, disabled, and young population. I will now pass it back to Anita to talk about lessons learned.
So at this point, a good question becomes, what do we want to do moving forward based on the lessons we've learned? Well, we want to make sure the MM2045 plan prioritizes public education about the future of transportation, and this includes the need for all modes of transportation and an understanding that new technologies and innovative changes to our system are coming. So our plan is to continue to engage the public about the issues they care about, issues such as congestion, mobility, and safety. And we need to talk about how self-driving vehicles have the potential to address current transportation problems and the potential to change how we approach mobility issues in the future. It's also important to support and continue to grow the research and development arms that are engaged in advanced technology in Michigan, which is key to retaining and attracting top talent and for job growth in our state. So I think MetroQuest has been vital to the success of our public involvement mission, and one of our main takeaways is that it is indeed possible to greatly extend the reach of public involvement efforts well beyond what would be possible using traditional means alone, like public meetings. And here in Michigan, I have to say we're very pleased with the outcome. And Brad, do you have something you'd like to add in terms of thoughts on our lessons learned?
Yes. Overall, we are very encouraged and very pleased by the sheer volume of responses that we received from our public and stakeholders across the state as a result of this. few things that we learned along the way that we are working cooperatively with MetroQuest on is the ability to have a version of the survey. It is very visually friendly for folks, so for those who can see it, it's very great for people to be able to go through and navigate. But we did some lessons learned as to how we can turn the survey into a version that is readable for the visually impaired. And so we've worked with them, and we're able to develop that midstream throughout the survey process. In addition, we got to be careful about using too much industry jargon or terminology as we go through that effort. In general, we talk about these terms all the time, but for the general public, we have to make sure that we explain it in ways that they can understand. Other thing that we did work quite heavily on was to ensure that where we did our in-person public meetings, that we went the extra mile to try to go to those communities to host meetings as well. This map up here shows our new environmental justice zones across the state of Michigan. As part of our long-range plan, we revitalized the process for identifying environmental justice areas. For those not familiar with environmental justice, those are targeted populations of either minority groups or lower income populations. And so what we did is, using a percentile approach, we looked at census tracts across the state where there was a greater percentage of at least one of these particular target populations. And so, as you can see across the state, if you compare that with how we receive comments from the town hall as well as MetroQuest, overall they overlap pretty well. We will be doing some additional outreach in the rural areas up north in the next go-around to ensure that we are further getting comments from those areas in the Upper Peninsula and in the Northern Lower Peninsula. But our schedule moving forward now is, we're in the process now where we are just met yesterday, as a matter of fact, with key stakeholders and our MDOT core team to develop a draft vision statement for the new long-range plan. And that will be reviewed by our MDOT leadership and our State Transportation Commission later on this summer. And then from there, we're going to go into the development of finalizing goals. And then we will be engaging the public 2 more times here through the development of this plan. In the fall of 2019, we are going to go out again using MetroQuest and telephone town halls and the similar hybrid of options that we did here to discuss objectives and strategies on specific strategic direction and how we're going to implement this vision that came out of this first round of public comment. And then in the fall of 2020, once we have a draft plan completed, we're going to go out one more time for our 3rd round of comments for the completed draft plan before it gets adopted. And so we do hope to adopt this plan by January of 2021. I know it seems like a long way out, but it's coming on us pretty fast and we have a lot of work to do. But as just want to highlight, we are very encouraged by the use of MetroQuest and how we've been able to work throughout this effort. And we look forward to continuing to utilize MetroQuest and other public engagement methods, not only for this long-range plan, but for other MDOT planning processes in the future. Now I'm going to turn it back to Dave, and he's going to discuss further best practices across the nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brad and Shane and Anita and Kyle. That was fantastic. Thank you very much for the kind words about MetroQuest, but I really want to compliment you all on such a greatly implemented and well thought through public involvement plan just across the board. There's so many best practices that your case study embodies that I really was looking forward to presenting it to the audience. We spend a lot of our time at MetroQuest looking across the entire industry, working with many industry associations on best practices for public outreach, for planning projects, everybody from the APA to the TRB and public involvement associations. And so I would like to share with you what we have learned looking across many different long-range transportation plans with regard to best practices. And folks online, you'll notice that this team employed pretty much all of these best practices. So this is by way of summary. So public involvement for LRTPs, the tips for success, and this is looking at case studies and their performance and trying to tease out what makes the biggest difference in terms of improving public involvement. In those categories that I raised at the beginning about the challenges associated with long-range transportation plans, so in the categories of increasing participation, it's so important, and this team developed a fantastic survey that took people on average about 5 minutes to complete. We find that 5 minutes is about the right ask for people. Asking people for much more than 5 minutes, people get distracted, they don't have the time, they'll do it later, and they never come back to it. So 5 minutes tends to be about the most you can expect the massive number of people that are out there to participate, and so it's best to keep it to 5 minutes and try to make the best use of that 5 minutes. Because online engagement allows people to participate on their own schedule, that's one of the biggest factors associated with online engagement, allowing people to pick and choose when they're participating and not have to come to a scheduled public meeting or an event like a town hall. That makes a huge difference because people have some time in their day, they're on the bus, they have time to participate. It's so important to recognize that people are not typically very motivated to participate, and so anything that you can do to make it fun and fast for people is terrific. And because you only have 5 minutes, using visuals allows people to move very quickly, but also makes it kind of an interesting experience for people. Making sure that your online engagement is well adapted to different interfaces so people, regardless of what device they're using, have a comfortable experience where they can really see what they need to do very clearly and they can move quickly and intuitively. And increasingly, as the team talked about, mobile is such an increasingly popular way of engaging, and so it's important that you really look at how your survey looks and feels on mobile, because people are going to be trying, and if they're frustrated, they'll just go another way. It's important to recognize that people feel safe providing their input, and many online, even online, certainly face-to-face public workshops are very intimidating for people that, to share their views publicly. They might be afraid of being ridiculed, but even online forums where people feel like other people are going to jump on what they say can feel quite intimidating. So it's important to provide a safe option for people. Next, in terms of broadening demographics, just a few comments here, and this team really did a great job of this, of monitoring the results as they're coming in to see who they're engaging and maybe who they're missing or who's underrepresented in the demographic mix of who's been engaged so far, and using those to track the participation by demographic, and then from there target a particular population. So here's an example of the participation using MetroQuest in a recent project in Los Angeles, and you'll see that it maps almost perfectly to the actual demographics of the Los Angeles area. There's so many opportunities to go to where people are and target particular demographics that might be underrepresented by, for example, going to a community event that's already been scheduled by another group and simply setting up a table and allowing people to participate quickly as they're strolling by, or using other ways of targeting them. For example, social networking allows you to pinpoint a particular demographic and go out and engage them specifically. So if there's an underrepresented group, it's easy to promote social network notifications to specifically those people, and it really uses your staff time and resources efficiently to get a whole bunch of people to participate online organically and then pinpoint those missing or underrepresented demographics. Next, the importance of weaving in education. In the introduction, and the case study team really did a great job of highlighting how complicated transportation planning is. We take it for granted when we're working in the field, but the public are just not as aware of the constraints and trade-offs and options that we would like them to be. What we've done with MetroQuest to respond to this is create what we call micro learning moments, where we have screens that present things in a game-like fashion that allow people to learn about options very quickly and participate at the same time. So combining that education with the engagement in one screen that takes, usually about a minute or a minute and a half. The first message around education is focusing on people's own priorities. We mentioned that, it can be quite abstract to people, policy orientation, really finding issues that are being dealt with in the planning process that are expressed in language that is going to resonate with people. Self-driving cars, it's something that our people would be concerned about. And so expressing things, not in terms of policy, but in terms of people's priorities. It's important to put the citizens in the planner's seat. And so inviting them to nominate areas where there's improvements that are needed for transportation is a great way to do that. This is a project elsewhere in Michigan. One of the MPOs in Michigan used MetroQuest for their long-range transportation plan, SEMCOG, and they did a great job of inviting people to kind of get into the planner's seat and nominate areas that need improvement. It's important to foster appreciation over trade-offs to be faced, because it's human nature to kind of ask the government to do everything and expect that there's nothing going to be traded off. But we know as planners that's not reality. And so helping people understand that we do need to make trade-offs whenever we're creating a future strategy, and inviting them to weigh in on where would you put these trade-offs? Where would you put our emphasis if we only have limited resources to go around? Another way of communicating constraints is to invite people to allocate a budget to different categories. And what people are going to discover very quickly is it's easy to run out of coins, and instantly they're gaining a little bit of empathy for what you're facing as an agency, where you only have a certain number of coins yourself and you have to figure out how to allocate it with the public's input. And it's important to put as much structure into the questions as possible, so you're embedding education, like in the scenario screen, where people can see visualizations of different future options, pros and cons of those options before they weigh in on which one they prefer. And lastly, in terms of best practices, asking the right questions at the right time, particularly with these projects like long-range transportation plan. They occur in phases, and it's important to start the engagement early and to engage maybe multiple times throughout the process. So at the beginning of the process, you might start in the kind of the shallow end, in a very open way, engaging people on what their priorities are, or maybe identifying issues where improvements are needed. And then as you move into the middle phases of your planning process, you might then start asking people to select which projects they would like to see funded, or to look at different alternative scenarios for the future. So it gets a little bit more tangible in the middle stages. And then toward the end, perhaps you might want to get people to weigh in on particular infrastructure options. So getting right down onto the ground, so to speak, or maybe looking at things like balancing budgets or any other details that would be relevant to the implementation process. So you can see different stages require different types of interaction with the community. So very quickly, those are our kind of top best practices for long-range transportation planning. Now, not surprising, at MetroQuest, we do follow our own advice. When we look across best practices, we have designed MetroQuest to be as responsive to these best practices as possible. So focusing on trying to broaden the engagement to not only a lot of people, but a diverse audience, but also, as you saw from the examples, embedding the education into it to collect as informed input as possible, because we know that as planners, when you're standing up there trying to defend your public involvement input, in order for that input to be actionable, we need to know that enough people have participated and that it's credible information coming in. So I'd like now to just show you, because we've just shown you a whole lot of screenshots, and the case study had their screenshots in there. I want to show you just a couple of these in action. So here we've got, this is the one that they were talking about, the survey that they were referring to. So you'll recognize these things. The welcome screen just starts people with a few nuggets of information about the long range transportation plan, but really just encourages people to begin quickly. And then the first question, which is a terrific question to start with, by the way, great job on this team asking people what's important to them. It really does set a terrific tone that it is about you. It is about your priorities. We need to make some choices here. We can't have everything as the #1 priority. So instantly they're starting to think about trade-offs, and they're understanding what's on the table and what impact the long-range transportation plan could have on their own quality of life. Then moving on, as they showed, they had some great and really meaningful trade-offs for people to concern. Where would you put your emphasis? More on bikes and pedestrian and transit, or more on cars and trucks? And people are going to have different input depending on their point of view. And it's important for them to understand that we can't do everything simultaneously. We need to make priority choices, and getting them involved in that is important. And this one, where you're allocating a budget, and you'll see that I'll very, very quickly start running out if I think safety and security, and then I start looking at all of these other areas, and you know what? It's hard to do these things, and really you're trying to generate that empathy, but also trying to collect meaningful input. And then, of course, and I love these demographic questions that they included in the end. People are very willing to fill these out because it's anonymous. You're just talking about who you are, and you can really learn a lot about who you're engaging and potentially who you're missing. So that's a statewide long-range transportation plan. Let me show you one that was at the metropolitan scale. So this is a recent project that also enjoyed terrific public involvement in Tampa. And so you'll see how different this is because it's for a different phase of the long-range transportation planning process. They also were engaging people on their priorities as a great way to start the conversation, but this one invited people to look at 3 different scenarios for the future and to see the impact of those scenarios on people's own top priorities. So I said that alternatives to driving was #1. This one doesn't do very well on 4 out of 5 of my top priorities. You can look at this next scenario. It's a bit of a mixed bag as well. This scenario actually does fairly well on my top priorities, but you can see that it involves a trade-off. So when I say, you know what, I like this one, I'm saying it understanding that there's a trade-off there. And this one also includes some great visualizations of what these alternatives include. I like this visual preference screen here where they invited people to weigh in on particular roadway options. So for example, people don't think about, intersection types, but here they're being wading into the process and looking at different types of infrastructure and allowing people to comment on them and to weigh them. And of course, across transit or community or funding, there's a lot of different areas to engage. And again, they finished with some demographic questions. Let me just show you a couple of screens now because I want to get onto that Q&A session quickly. This one for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. I like this one because people were invited to weigh in on particular projects that were being considered. This is maybe perhaps more for the latter stages of the planning process, where you're inviting people to say yay or nay to particular projects, and these could have associated with them a budget, so you keep people honest. You can pick one that's really expensive or pick several that are moderately priced. So I thought that was a very effective way of communicating constraints, but also options. This one, the long-range transportation plan for Alexandria, I thought this particular screen was very useful because it invited people early on in the transportation planning process to nominate, for example, where infrastructure, like, we need another bus stop in this location. And these maps can just get filled with suggestions, and you can subdivide and you can use the GIS tools to see where improvements are needed, and it really does help you early on in the planning process to demonstrate that transparency and openness to public input. So yeah, I just love championing some of the best projects that our clients are using. I can't show you them all because there's thousands of them, but there's just some examples from agencies that are using MetroQuest for long-range transportation planning. With that, and recognizing the fact that not really sure what you were looking for when you joined this webinar, I wanted to open up a quick poll to invite you to tell us what additional information would be most helpful at this point in your trend towards improving your public involvement. So I've just launched a poll there. So if you're multitasking, please come back to your computer and your mouse and let us know what additional information would be most helpful for you that we could provide. And we'll do our best to do that. So would you prefer to have feedback from any of our experts on your public engagement plans or approaches? Would you like to just learn more about some features that you're looking for with respect to online engagement or MetroQuest, or just curious to know more about how it functions? I wasn't able to discuss anything like pricing, so if you're just curious about costs associated with it, because they're customized for each individual organization type, we would be happy to share that with you if you just tell us a little bit about your organization. Or would you like a sample online public engagement case study? We'd be happy to send you that as well. So any of those, I'll give you just a few more seconds to weigh in on that. Because the 2045 team did such a great job with promotion, I thought it would be useful to include in the follow-up a document that we have created at MetroQuest about the most insightful and effective ways of promoting online engagement like a pro. So we'll keep an eye out for that in the follow-up, but we think this team in particular used many of those best practices, and there's a few additional ones as well. Because these webinars are becoming fairly popular, I wanted to give you an opportunity to pre-register for the next webinar, which is going to feature the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and they're going to be discussing something a little bit different. It's called Beyond Fear, Public Views on Emerging Transportation Technologies. We're going to zero in on new transportation technologies and the public's opinion of them and what can be done to maybe allay some of those concerns that people have around new technologies, such as self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles, and of all kinds, as well as Uber, Lyft, and so many other technological innovations that are changing transportation planning dramatically. So let me just allow you just in a few seconds to let us know if you are interested in that webinar. We would be happy to hold a place for you because we expect it to be quite popular like this one. So just let us know if you would like to attend that and learn more about emerging technologies and how they're viewed by the public. So thank you for those responses. So I'm going to close that and we're going to move into our Q&A. So our Q&A, I'm going to invite the Brad, Anita, Kyle, and Shane to join me again and let us dive into some of these questions. They are, as I suspected, there's so many great questions that are here. So let's just dive right in. Question for you folks at MDOT. Wow, great job on involving 6,300 people. Can you comment about what difference or impact did that make to your plan or your planning process or any? I know that you have yet to adopt the plan, but what are you seeing in terms of differences that kind of level of public involvement makes?
what it's really doing for us, this is Brad, what it's really doing for us is giving us some meat in terms of providing some input so that when we write our vision statement and we go to our stakeholders and to get their buy-in to decide how do we want the future of transportation to look, we can point back to these numbers from the survey. They say this is what the people have said. So many times in the past we come in with the vision where we come in with only a few comments and then make that assumption that it applies to everyone. But in this case, with 6,300 people responding across the state of Michigan, we really feel that it has provided more defense and more support as Michigan, as MDOT and all its stakeholders come together to write that vision statement and to develop the policy and strategic direction for the next 25 years in Michigan.
Terrific. Thanks, Brad. This next question, I can answer it super quickly, so we keep moving. Is MetroQuest provided as a subscription or is it pay-per-use software? That one's super easy. It is an annual subscription, and you can use it as many times as you like for as many surveys as you want. So that's an easy one. Another one for you folks, can you tell us anything more about the popular, in quotes, popular public forum that you had success with in terms of promoting your public involvement? So Shane, you talked about I think it was that person with a whole bunch of Reddit users. Can you tell us anything more about that?
Yeah, it was primarily a credit to the fact that the MetroQuest survey was promoted so proactively by MDOT through a variety of channels that a popular Reddit site with 60,000 subscribers, and it is a site that deals primarily with Michigan policy issues and things like that. And we understand there's other, materials on Reddit that we are not wanting to be associated with, but in this particular case, this was a public policy type group that had 60,000 subscribers. So when that was posted on there, obviously these folks were very engaged, and so they jumped at the chance to complete the MetroQuest survey.
Right. Great. Thanks, Shane. So a few questions that I can answer quickly here have come in about MetroQuest. How does MetroQuest compare to something like SurveyMonkey? Well, I think probably the project team here can answer that as well. But certainly what we've focused on in MetroQuest is to make it fun and not feel like homework, but also to make it a learning experience so people can appreciate some of the complexities around some of these choices in a way that you couldn't do with multiple choice questions. Could tell you more certainly if you wanted to contact us directly, but I'll leave it at that. Somebody else is asking, is there a robust template library in MetroQuest? So yes, there is. Because we've had so many of these projects being created by our clients, we maintain a vast library of different types of screens and how they can be configured, so to kind of allow you to hit the ground running and move quickly. Another person is talking about, can you say more about the privacy? Privacy of responses is so critical for people, especially around controversial projects. And so what we have done with MetroQuest is to avoid that kind of possibility for groupthink, where people are influenced by each other's discussions, either in a public forum, online, or face-to-face. We feel that it's better to just get people's priorities and opinions without kind of fear that they're going to be influenced or biased by other people. We have to close off, folks, but let me ask you one more question before we close off. How did the number of survey responses from MetroQuest compare to previous long-range plans that you've done?
Well, I'll just give the example of the last plan that we did in 2016, which was a reaffirmation of a plan that we developed in the mid-2000s. So we went out to the public at the very end of the reaffirmation effort. We went to 21 different locations across the state of Michigan to try to reach out, holding standard public meetings in governmental agencies or partnering accordingly. And I think we received a total of like 125 people that participated across those 21 meetings. And the overall comments on the long-range plan reaffirmation was very sparse overall. And so I can't even tell you what percentage increase to get over 6,000 surveys through MetroQuest.
Right.
By attaching to these other existing events, nearly 1,300 people participated in these public events that we were at through the different activities. Mm-hmm. And instead of trying to do this stuff kind of by ourselves, we tag teamed with other parts of MDOT, our regional planning agencies, Michigan Association of Planning, our metropolitan planning organizations, and everyone in terms of really trying to work together to help explain this relationship. So the numbers are just so astoundingly better and encouraging that to try to say, to put a comparison beyond, it's like 10,000% better, I guess. I don't know.
Right. The numbers are pretty staggering. Well, congratulations to Michigan Department of Transportation and WSP for putting together such a fabulous public involvement program. Thank you, everyone online for participating. Thank you to the American Planning Association and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation for co-sponsoring today's webinar. There, if you're collecting AICP credits, there you see the link. We will also send that to you in the follow-up email, so you don't need to copy it down. But most importantly, thank you very much to MDOT and WSP for preparing for and delivering today's case study presentation. Congratulations and well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, and take care, everyone.